Hi, my name is Kev Scott from Linear Thoughts. In our garden we have a total of 5 Reolink RLC 410 cameras that we have bought over a number of years, and they work very well for us. We use them predominantly for watching nature in the garden. Reolink state that they have a certain power requirement, but I am finding in practice that they take a lot less power than that. This can be useful to know if you are, for example, are buying a power over Ethernet switch to power them, as you don't want to overspec it. So in summary, this video will cover how I came to that conclusion, and will cover aspects such as how much additional power is lost in Ethernet cables, because it all counts. However, I don't think it would be too much of a spoiler alert to state right now that the cable losses are reasonably small for the cameras used here. Okay, let's get started. This diagram shows the camera arrangement. They are all power over Ethernet cameras. We have one Hikvision camera that is mounted in a bird box. It was chosen as it had a nice short focal length. I'm not planning to talk about that in any detail, however, so let's move on. These are the 5 Reolink cameras. They are all RLC 410 5 megapixels cameras, as I have previously mentioned. All 6 cameras go into a Netgear GS310TP 8-port gigabit power over Ethernet plus Smart Managed Pro switch. You might be thinking to yourself, hasn't he over-engineered this a bit by fitting that? And to an extent I would agree with you. I don't need most of the features it has, but that wasn't the reason I bought it. The 3 reasons I bought it were: number 1, at the time it was very cheap. You may be aware that Scotsmen have a reputation for being thrifty, and I feel it was important to keep that tradition going. It's quite compact. I had a particular location I wanted to fit it in, and size was important. And finally, if I ever wanted to add even more cameras, I can make use of one of the SPF ports and have 8 cameras in the garden and still have a gigabit connection back to the house. One of the key features this switch has, however, is that it is able to report power usage on each of the ports, which we will go into in more detail shortly. The power over Ethernet switch then goes into our home network via a straightforward gigabit router. There isn't much to say about it. We happen to have a TP-Link one and it works well. Finally, one of the PCs in the house is running Blue Iris surveillance software, and we watch and record all of the nature in the garden using that. Okay, if we take a quick look at the camera spec, we can see the power of the camera is spec'd at 10 watts. Now if we take a look at the Netgear switch, we can see it has a total power budget of 55 watts. So in theory I should only be able to drive 5 cameras with that. However, hold that thought and let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as marketing types might have said in the 80s. If we go into the control panel for the S350 series 8-port gigabit P over E plus Ethernet Smart Managed Pro switch with 2 SFP ports, we see that the total power consumed by the 6 cameras is a grand total of 16 watts. Note that this is a reading during the daytime when the infrared LEDs are turned off. If we look at the individual cameras, we can see in general that they are averaging around 2.3 watts. There are, however, 2 exceptions to that. Camera G5 is consuming 4.8 watts. The reason for that is it is located inside a hedgehog feeding station where it is always dark, and so the infrared LEDs are always on. Camera G6 is a Hikvision one in a bird box, which we aren't really interested in this video. If we now look at the nighttime set of cameras, we can see that they are averaging around 4.4 watts. What this means is I could easily drive 8 of these cameras from this PoE switch and still use only 70% of the available capacity. Note that G4 is a little bit higher power consumption than the others. You should hold that thought. But you ask, what about power lost in the cables? To which I would reply, that is a good question. Power is naturally lost in the cables because they have a certain resistance, and that will result in additional power needing to be supplied, and that will increase the longer the cables get. However, the power measurements I have shown earlier are taken with the cameras in place in the garden. In other words, the Ethernet cable runs are part of that power usage. We can use switch software to tell us how long each of the cables are by running a cable test. You will see from that test that most of the cables are less than 30 meters, but one of them, G4, is up to 50 meters long. All of the cables with the exception of G4 are run underground, and I've included a link in the description to give an idea of what they are like. However, the cable on G4 is what we call a roving camera. It is on a tripod and we move it around the garden. It uses a cheap indoor cable, which I know I will have to replace eventually, but for now it is faring well. It is, however, a good one to use to show the losses in the cable. If we use this online PoE calculator, we can see that the power loss in this cable is around 0.2 watts. If I take one of the other cables, we get a reading of around 40 milliwatts. So the two takeaways for me from this are: 1. The Netgear switch is doing a good job of power measurements, as the 0.2 watt difference we saw with the camera G4 is proven by calculation as well. And 2. If you are using reasonable cable and it doesn't need to be pure copper, the power loss in the cable is pretty well negligible, at least with the cameras of this level of power consumption. I hope you found this video useful and it gave you more insight into the actual power consumption of the Reolink RLC 410 cameras. My findings were certainly that the Reolink power spec does seem very generous, at least in my configuration. The main use of this information should be to help you with your choice of PoE switch. Some come with 55 watt power supplies and you might think that would be inadequate, but this should have allayed those concerns. There are certainly a number of units that can supply higher power as well, and that is the safest option, but the cost could be reasonably higher, up to 50% in the case of some Netgear units. You might also want to consider whether a managed switch, like this one, could provide some benefits as well. Finally, we looked at the power lost in the cable. The exact summary of that is unless you are running units with a high power draw and long cables, the power loss should be fairly insignificant. If you did find this video useful, please consider hitting the like button, and if you would like to see more videos of this type in the future, please consider subscribing. See you soon.